possibly the single most important thing you can do to promote or market your book is come up with a really good pitch. Like something short, a tagline, a very short blurb that gets people excited to read your book. Now, this is not important just because it gets people excited to share your book, but it's also shareable. That means that if you have a pitch that sticks in someone's head, not only are they more likely to buy your book, they're also more likely to talk about it with other people, and when they talk about it, be able to talk about it in a way that gets their friends involved. So this is not just about the people you're directly talking to or marketing. This is about their friends and how to get word of mouth. So having a good pitch will make all of your posts, your interviews, etc. more effective. It will be able to multiply the people that you can reach with your book. However, a lot of authors really struggle with this, and I'm learning the art of the book pitch as well. So I sat down with some authors in my local area in Austin. We had lunch. We talked about what pitches hooked us and what makes a good pitch. This is what I learned. First, to set the stage, I think it's helpful to talk about why authors struggle with pitches. And one is they write the book first and think of the pitch later. Now, this is a little bit backwards from a business perspective, and it makes your life a lot harder, and I will say why. So, for instance, in YouTube, I was just watching a video detailing Mr. Beast's philosophy of how to be insanely, ridiculously successful on YouTube. And he said his idea before he writes a YouTube and produces and films and edits a YouTube video, the way he thinks about this is the purpose of the video is to fulfill the promise that the title and the thumbnail make, i.e. pitch first, then write to that. That is a powerful combo. It is great for making sure that you stay on point and when you're writing and when you're editing. And this is something I've actually seen in other books, is there are a lot of places where the book comes really close to a good pitch, but they do something that muddies the water. And if they had a really good clear of, wait, this is what I want to deliver, this is what the book is about, then they would have structured the book not in a bad way or a cliche way, but a way that would set that book up so much more powerfully to marketing, right? They would have some defining scenes that would resonate with people. It would make your book actually more powerful, more resonant, not just like as a cheaper gimmick or whatever. But it's powerful it's really powerful to create the pitch first and write the book that fulfills that pitch. And that's just kind of true of a lot of endeavors. It's not just the craft of writing. It's like, start with the end in mind. To quote, was it Stephen R. Covey of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? That's true of pretty much anything. If you have a specific idea of what you're going for, you will be a lot more effective and efficient in doing that thing than if you kind of amble into something. Ambling into something is great for a hobby, but if you're looking for something more out of your writing career to reach more people, to support yourself or support yourself more part-time, then you really want to start with the end in mind. What is your book about? What promise is going to excite people? And if you don't do that, one of the reasons why this is hard to do afterwards is after you've written your book, just kind of however you wanted to, you've got 1,000 details in your head. And they're complicated, they might be conflicting, you don't know which ones to pick out, which might resonate most with people. And in fact, they might be conflicting, right? You might, a good pitch for this scene might actually not work for a lot of other scenes. And so it doesn't mean that your book can only have one theme that it ever discusses or, one note or whatever, but it does have to consistently deliver on that theme throughout. If you don't do that at all, if you don't have any themes that you consistently deliver on or an experience that you're consistently delivering on in your book that readers want to consume, they want to experience, then one, you might just genuinely have a harder book to pitch, but two, even getting the traction that you can out of your book, right? It's going to be hard for you to sort through all of those scenes and pick something that is a good pitch for it. Because you can't see the forest for the trees. So that is one reason why authors struggle with a pitch, is they wrote the book and then tried to come up with a pitch. However, there's advice. If you have done that, there's still advice later on for how to craft it, and I will later on, so stay tuned. Take a book I think does not have a good pitch and try and improve that for an already existing book. So life is not over if you've done that, but you have made your life a little bit trickier. So the second reason why authors think of or struggle with pitches is because a lot of authors hate marketing, and I get it, but if you want to be commercially successful, I mean, if you want to support yourself, or even if you don't care about the money as much, but you want people reading and thinking about what you're doing, then being able to market and promote your work is critical. Now, if this is just a creative journal, you're having fun, and if no one reads it, fine, that's a different beast. But if you want people to read your book, then you really ought to think about the marketing. And again, pitches are only a gimmick if you're doing like one of two things. Either you're not delivering on the promise, so you promise something that your novel doesn't deliver on, then that is a gimmick. Or secondly, right, if you're just repeatedly using the same structure, kind of doing something by the book, or by the genre, by the trope, to try and hook people in, then yeah, that is kind of a gimmick. That is kind of shallow. But hopefully your book is about something that matters to you. And the pitch should revolve around that and bring other people in. And that's not a gimmick. That is relating to other people. Hey, quick interruption. So my mission is to fix the internet for sci-fi and fantasy creators and fan bases. I think there are reasons why it is so hard to build a following and support yourself. Mainly that like most websites aren't built for building communities and fan bases. They're built so large websites can advertise to your audience. And so that's just hugely broken and insane. It should not be as hard as it is to create a following and support yourself on creative work. That doesn't mean everyone's going to get there, but I would like more people to be able to support themselves with their creative work. That's my mission. This channel is just the beginning of that. I want to build better websites and tools. If you like and subscribe, you can help me build the channel and more quickly get to a place where I can build you tools that will make this whole business of writing thing easier. So please, like and subscribe, share. That's great. That too, yes, please. Or tell me, if this video is not good enough to earn your like and subscribe, tell me below in the comments what I could give you that would be more valuable. Thanks. So what is a good pitch? From our conversation while we were dissecting pitches, and I'll give you the rather funny example later on that stuck with me, and someone immediately recognized the book by the pitch. They did a good job with this blurb, and I think it came from someone who, this good pitch that I'm teasing actually came from someone who read the author's work, and they realized that worked so effectively they put it on their cover, which I think was a good move. It certainly stuck with me. But what makes a good pitch is one, it's short, right? So if someone is going to be able to remember this, to buy this and share this with their friends, it's got to be short. So kind of 1 or 2 sentences, less than 15 words is kind of playing around with it, what I got out of this book pitch. Now, of course, you have more space to like dive into detail and hook someone in with the blurb, but if you have that one line on the cover, top of the back or whatever, if you have that one line, they're much more likely to actually read on and kind of let you flesh out your idea. So it should be short. It should be remarkable. Right? So what I hear from someone who writes a book that's cross-genre is, I can't sell this. This is cross-genre. Well, the pitch I'm going to share with you that's great is cross-genre, and it's one of the things that makes it strangely compelling and interesting. And if you think about this, if you were a purely by the genre trope-laden book, or whatever, where you're doing exactly what everything else does in the genre, that's going to be a difficult pitch. It's not going to be as good because you have nothing unique about your book, right? Being cross-genre can make it unique. You still have to know who to pitch it to at the end of the day, and promise something they want, but it's not bad that it's cross-genre. And in fact, being exactly in your genre can make it harder to make a remarkable pitch, whereas cross-genre, especially if it's, genres that aren't frequently crossed, then that people have, that are drawn to, they have that have an appeal. They're not kind of generic, like science fantasy. Like, okay, that's kind of broad, and that's been done before, right? But I don't know. I have no clue whether it's going to be successful, but I am going to have a lot of fun writing my Cozy Cthulhu novel. And if that's just the pitch, that's the only thing that works, I'll see if that's what resonates with people, if people want buy-in. But Cozy Cthulhu novel, if that grabs people's imagination, then that's the pitch, right? That just being that weird cross-genre might be enough. And then, there's a lot of cross-genre stuff that might be middle ground. I might try and rein that cross-genre in, so see if I can be more specific. So, not necessarily the Cthulhu, but what's something Cthulhu-esque that's actually in my novel, because the character Cthulhu is not in my novel. Maybe there'll be some kind of reference or something. I'll have to do some fan service, right? Maybe some of or probably lean into the cozy elements. What are the cozy elements of my story, and then contrast them with like the cosmic horror, Lovecraftian, Cthulhu, whatever. So it should be remarkable, and actually, depending on how you do it, being cross-genre can be part of what makes your book remarkable. It doesn't have to be that. If there's a trope within your genre that you break from, or something you tried that you don't often see, or something that has been done before but is somehow more poignant, higher stakes, more emotional, more relatable. All of these things are things that might make your pitch more remarkable. And so the third thing is that it promises something the reader wants. And I should have added this in, but promises something the reader wants in their language. And you'll see later on, again, stay tuned, for a generic pitch. And I'm willing to bet one of the reasons these marketing materials, I think, are less effective for this book, a book series that I love to read, and I bought because I like the author, who I talk about almost all the time. You can guess it if you've watched videos. It's an author who I like. I would not have bought this series based on the marketing materials if I didn't already like the author. And so it did not promise me anything I wanted in the language I understood. And I think the problem was that the author has their own sort of language they're referring to things in the book, and they wanted all of the language to be compatible with that. And I think that was a less effective marketing move. Maybe he's fine with that, but I don't know. All right, but yeah, you promise something your reader wants in their language. Because again, it doesn't it's not important how remarkable the pitch is if that doesn't have anything the author wants. And this actually works. Like this pitch that got me to buy a book just based on the pitch, that somebody else recognized just based on the pitch, didn't work for another author in the group, because even though it was short and remarkable, it didn't promise her anything she wanted. She just wasn't part of that audience, and that's okay. It doesn't have to promise everyone something they want, but it has to promise the reader, your target audience, something they want in their language. All right? And then the fourth that I am going to do, because if you don't have this, you will get terrible reviews and sink your sales, etc., is the fourth thing a good pitch does is match the content and tone of your book. So, right? If you are writing checks that your book can't cash, then you are going to get low reviews, and then that's going to impede your sales. If you kind of want this positive feedback cycle of people get excited about your book and buy it and love it and recommend it, and a new person gets excited about your book, right? If you're looking for that, right, you want a good pitch, but your book actually has to be able to deliver. So that's another thing to think about. All right, so I am going to dive into this example I've been teasing of a good pitch. The actual pitch, the blurb as written on the cover by one of the reviewers, is lesbian necromancers explore a haunted Gothic palace in space. Do you know what that book is? It's Gideon the Ninth. All right, so let's dive into this. It's short enough to remember. To be honest, when I was throwing this out at the pitch thing, I hadn't just looked at the book. I didn't know we were going to focus on pitches. I didn't come prepared with like a pitch that I'm like, this was awesome. But when I had to think of like the last time I bought a book solely because the pitch interested me, it was this, and what I remembered was lesbian necromancers in space. The Gothic castle, haunted Gothic castle, is even better. Right when I went back to that, I'm like, oh yeah, that is even better. That did grab me more. But the lesbian necromancers in space, it is short. Even the longer version is pretty short enough that I could remember a lot of the major beats if I missed one of the specifics of the pitch. This is, it's remarkable, right? It's kind of a few different crossover genres, and this is kind of one where it's like, it's the genre crossover that makes it especially remarkable. It feels very pulpy, and you may or may not be surprised by this, but I don't search up books by the lesbian keyword. Like I wasn't focused on that part of that. I wasn't turned off by it either. I kind of enjoyed the tongue-in-cheek putting that first pulp feel of it. So, that was fine. But like necromancer, that's my jam. Like I'm always interested in necromancers as one, just a fun, weird trope, but two, which I think the author did, is like using necromancy to explore the boundaries of life and death and the relationship between the two. I think she does a good job throughout the series of playing around with that to some extent. And so, delivered not just on the necromancer part of things, but lastly, necromancers in space, I think is probably what caught me. Is like, okay, that's like, it's not just science fantasy, it's a little bit more specific, but I'm like, yeah, I'll read about space necromancers. And so that was a remarkable pitch. Like when I'd seen the whole pitch, my brain process was like, I've never read that before, i.e. it's remarkable, and I was curious enough to go ahead, like go to the actual book page, read the blurb, read some reviews to make sure it was what I wanted, but it was the pitch that got my attention long enough to do that, and made it so I could share that with other people, right? Made it easily shareable. So it was short and remarkable. It promised something the reader wants. Like it did deliver for me, I think, on multiple levels. And we'll kind of get into some of the tone elements later, but like there were necromancers. It was in space. It was mostly in a haunted castle, so I'd almost say the space was irrelevant, but there actually was a lot of kind of space opera politics, which obviously could be epic fantasy dynasty politics as well, but like all right, that comes in, and she delivers more on space in later books as well, so it delivered on that. And yes, there were lesbians, so it was promising me an experience of kind of unique experience of necromancers in space and language that I understood, so that's another reason why it's a good pitch. And then lastly, the book has to deliver on the content and tone, or like the content and tone of the pitch have to match the book. The book has to deliver on those promises. And I've already kind of talked about like the content is there, and I'll dive into a little bit of like the tone, right? When you lead with like lesbian necromancers in space, or explore a haunted Gothic castle in space, it sounds really pulpy, that cross genre of all things. There are other things you could pitch with of the book, but this was actually tonally really appropriate, especially to the first book. So the main character, I mean, the concept is kind of cross-genre, but the main character is also somewhat intentionally obtuse and lowbrow, and is having to enter a refined space with all of these refined manners and politics and etiquette, and she's someone who reads pulpy, dirty magazines, who is lowbrow, who kind of comes along for the ride and has to figure out her way of like kind of finessing the other necromancers in space, but balancing that with her unique style and strengths, right? And so even that pulpy tone matched the character. Now this is interesting, really different. This author gets incredibly exploratory and writes all 3 of the novels, I think, so far in that series from a different perspective with a very different tone, different characters. So it's not true of the whole series, but this pulp is absolutely delivered in the first book, and her delivering it, writing this great pitch and delivering it on the first book made it so I read her book 2 and 3. And to be honest, like, if she hadn't had this pitch, one, I would not have bought the first book, right? But if she hadn't written a pitch she delivered on, I wouldn't have picked up on the second book. And to be honest, it drove me nuts on the second book because it's not written in letters format or anything, but it is in the second person, like it's in and that just like grated on my nerves. I figured out why before the big reveal, and I still hated it. It was still just very distracting, like I got at what she was trying to do and the artsy thing. And for me, that was just so more annoying than, it's the annoyance and the mental effort of like ignoring the constant use of the second person definitely outstripped like the experimental edginess of doing so, or like the benefit from it. So and so that's the power of a good pitch. And I think again here part of the problem is she went from very pulpy to very experimental in like the space of 2 books. I'm not going to say that is or is not good series design. It's certainly interesting. And I think it will definitely show her who her true fans are versus people who just like the initial pulpy appeal of it. And so if like what she wants to do is go in a more experimental way, that's fine with her, but she certainly got a lot more exposure by having the right mass market appeal or certain segment of the mass market appeal by that pitch. And I think she probably actually got a few different groups with that pitch. Again, there's probably people for whom, LGBTQ plus type content is their genre and they're looking for that specifically. And that's an audience, and she would probably lean into different parts of the story, in those interviews with that group and develop those things. Me is kind of like a pulp fantasy reader, right? I'm like necromancers, right? And you'd probably lead into like necromancers and Space Castle with me. So like different elements, right? You might lean into the romance parts of it, and the personal development for people who are really focused on character development, or the politics for people who like political intrigue, right? It doesn't mean your book only has to be one thing, but when you're talking to someone, you should know what they want, how to pitch it, and how to promise them what they want in their language, and then you need to deliver on that, which is the 4th part. So now I get to pick on one of my favorite authors. So I saw this in a book sale the other day, a trilogy with this on the cover of the case for the 3 books. It said, "Where there are villains, there will be heroes." What series is this? Like, honestly, like, villains and heroes are in most books. Like, this is not, I guess, like, slice of life or like realistic It's probably not a biography unless it's someone who's really full of themselves. Like, but you're like, what else is this? This could be fantasy. It could be romance. It could be sci-fi. It could be historical. It could be like, you name it. There are villains and heroes, and they're not even doing anything. They just are. That is a waste of a verb there. This was a terrible, terrible pitch for a series, again, I happen to like. I just recently finished reading this to my kids, and I enjoyed it immensely. I think not only are there cool conflicts that my kids got into, but there's some powerful and good themes and messages delivered in this YA series. Anyway, if you guessed this was Brandon Sanderson's The Reckoners, you were right. Good job. You know those books. And you probably know them well if you recognize them by that tagline. The one thing I can really say about this pitch is it is short. So, like, it's not very remarkable, so it's not very memorable in that fashion, but it's what, like, eight words. That's great to shoot for, okay? That's something. But yeah, it's like, it is so unremarkable. It would be harder to be more bland, like, unless you said, this is a book and stuff happens. So this kind of bleeds into the third thing. It doesn't promise anything, like, except for heroes and villains, again, which is like a basic part of most stories in most genres. And so, yeah, having read the series, I know there's actually an interesting theme underlying this generic statement, but that theme is much more specific. And we'll get into my rewriting this to try and make it more specific, and in which I learned that writing a pitch is hard and there's a couple failures, but I think I ended up with something okay. Certainly better than this, not a high bar. So, and then lastly, it technically matches the content of the book. There are heroes and villains, but like there's hardly any tone to match the book. Since it doesn't promise something, there's not much to live up to. So, all right, I took a crack at rewriting this pitch, and please listen. Comment down below with your reactions, what you think of my pitch, or if you think you could do it better, pitch down below, comment. I'd love to hear it. This is good practice. I guess I'll have to describe the book if you're gonna pitch it. If you're not interested in this particular book series or not familiar with it, you can find your own book, your own books that you know, and like pitch them down below. How about that? Anyway, but let me give you the context. So Brandon Sanderson creates a world where certain people develop powers, and they call these people epics. And seemingly without exception, epics are psychopathic killers. And they herald the end of society as we know it, and basically they break apart nation states or nations. And like the most powerful epic kind of rules a city-state area, or just destroys it and moves on to the next city. But they'll rule that with like other epics that they keep in line below them. And the main character is an orphan whose father was killed by the epic who took over Chicago. And epics have different levels of powers. The one who took over Chicago is one of the most powerful. He has impenetrable skin, and he can fly and shoot lasers and turn things to steel. His name is Steelheart, and that's the name of the first book. So this orphan's father is someone who believes that the heroes will come. It can't just all be villains. And so he's in a situation early on in a scene where he's trying to help out a hero, and eventually accidentally pisses an epic, pisses that epic off, and that epic slaughters him, and everyone else in the bank. The main character escapes through, pure chance or luck, and he's grown up and he wants revenge. And there's a team called the Reckoners that takes on these epics in elaborate plots and traps, and kills them, and he wants to join them and convince them to attack Steelheart so he can get revenge. That's like the plot of the first book. So yes, there are villains and heroes, but like, how much of that did you get from the first blurb? So, all right. And the other problem is, it's not just like that one blurb. You think I'm taking, I'm maybe making a big deal out of just this one small thing. But if you look at the blurb, it says more about what happens, that, it's how far would you go for revenge if someone killed your father, if they took over your city, and, David's father was killed by an epic, so he needs to team up with the Reckoners to defeat them, or something like that. But it really doesn't get into what an epic is, and why this is a great underdog story, because you have a non-superpowered person trying to take on superpowered people. And to be honest, I'm willing to bet one of the reasons, I'll have to double check this, but like my guess is that part of the reason the marketing sucks so hard is that Brandon Sanderson never uses the term superhero, supervillain, or superhero, supervillain. I think he talks about powers. I don't know if he ever uses the term superpowers, but he's trying to avoid that language, even though he's very clearly writing in a genre of like superheroes and comic books. Like, these epics not only have powers, they think of like funny names for them, like, weird names for themselves, and have costumes. And there's a reference to something that sounds like the Superman symbol at one point, or at a few points throughout the series. And so it's very clearly drawing on the superhero genre, but he doesn't want to use those. He doesn't want to cheapen the experience of writing his novel. That's fine for the novel, but one of the problems, and one of the reasons why I think the marketing promises zero idea of like what they're really getting into, is that they don't promise something I want in my language. And so they don't say, superheroes and supervillains. I would get that. That would at least have been somewhat more specific. I'd know a genre that would have made the blurb better. But this is like if, in the previous example with the necromancers, right? Like, I get like necromancy, cool. Someone who sort of raises the dead, raises zombies and like facsimiles of the dead. And if instead of using that, she'd used some like technical term, like if she'd been vague, like supernatural politicians or something like that, rather than necromancer, I would have been like, I don't care about supernatural politicians or princes or princesses or whatever. Like, that's vague, right? If she'd used some highly technical term from the book instead of necromancers, I wouldn't have gotten that. Kind of like this one uses the term epics without explaining superheroes, superpowers, supervillains, anything like that. So I'm like, there's a group of people that are dangerous called the Epics, and they took over Chicago. Is it like a gang? Is this like just gang violence? Like, okay, right? Are these terrorists? Like, yeah, but superpowered ones, and that's important, right? And so I think that might be one of the reasons why these are so generic. So anyway, all right, let's get to the goods. I've talked a lot of smack to this point. Can I actually deliver the goods? Can I deliver a better pitch? And so bear with me as I share my honest iterations trying to do better. So my first attempt was something like, and I'm going to read this in like the movie preview voice, or my version of it, because I think that's what I was channeling, for better or for worse, and I think worse. But, I'm going to go 100% on this. Super-powered criminals have taken over. David, a rifle-toting orphan, is done waiting for heroes. Right? Like, okay, sort of short, kind of pushing it a little bit longer, but like only 2 sentences and less than 15 words, I think. Not bad, not great, whatever, mediocre. Is it remarkable? Rifle-toting orphan probably hits some people for better or for worse in the right places. Like that makes him sound younger than he is, but I wanted to get at the fact that his father was killed. That's kind of the revenge angle. He really does like guns, and specifically rifles. So like that's delivering some on who he is as a character. Super powered criminals have taken over. Feels a little generic. But does it promise something? It does promise something. Like a rifle-toting orphan going postal is kind of what it promises. And that's where we come to the fourth item. Does this match the book in tone and content? Like, it sounds like some kind of like B movie revenge film where it's just him running around and shooting things up. And so, like, no, it kind of gets the content, but the tone is completely wrong, and it makes a completely different promise about, like, what to expect from the story. So I have a few more attempts. We can take a look at these. A factory kid teams up with the Reckoners to take on the superpowered Overlord of Chicago. All right, so still a mouthful. A factory kid. Okay, feels less like young orphan. He's not gun-toting, but he's taking on. So, like, I'm less focused on gun violence, although there is plenty of that to be had in the books. A tasteful amount of gun violence. I guess if you're an American. Sigh. But a factory kid teams up with the Reckoners, right? It doesn't explain what the Reckoners are, but it brings them in more. This is not a solo gun-toting orphan going postal. It's more of a team heist. I think that brings maybe in the heist kind of mentality. It's not stealing heist, although I think there are some stealing heists in the book. But like it's more of that planning and operation type feel, which is great. And then taking on the superpowered Overlord of Chicago. So again, it's bringing in the superhero villain genre without, and there's a reason why I think Brandon Sanderson uses epic instead of superhero or supervillain. And so I avoided those two terms because, again, I think that's thematically appropriate to the book. I don't think it would have sunk the book if you just put that in the blurb and then never used it in your book, like because you would recognize that genre anyway, even without using it anyplace. So I think that would have been fine to throw in, but I try to be more subtle. And the Overlord of Chicago, like a superpower Overlord of Chicago, you know that something happened, right? You don't know about the full, apocalypse, but you know something happened for some superpowered dude to take over Chicago. So it actually gets quite a bit of content. The tone, Factory Kid teams up with the Reckoners to take on superpowered Overlord of Chicago, a little bit pluckier, which honestly matches the series a little bit more than like gun-toting orphan, rifle-toting orphan. That just feels like school shooter. Looking back on that, right? Writing a pitch is hard. So I think this hits better. I try for shorter because I didn't really succeed for short at either of those previous ones. What if there were supervillains and no superheroes? I think this actually really encapsulates what the series is about, and it dives into what is the nature of superpowers and what is predisposing people to, supervillainy as opposed to heroism. And so, like, actually, and it doesn't say a lot about the plot, but it does promise a lot of what Brandon Sanderson delivers, like on a conceptual level, in the in the book. Right? And so a lot of it is him exploring, like, what would the world look like? How would society change? How would people's understanding of the world be different for kids who grew up mostly under the thumb of, like, city-states under the thumb of superpowered despots, right? Like, and so, like, that without diving into the plot, like, that works. And if that's your audience, right? If you're speaking to the supervillains and superheroes crowd, that might not be a bad pitch, even though it's very simplistic. What if it's kind of a cerebral tone? The books are a little bit less cerebral than that, so like maybe the tone doesn't match 100%. But there is some exploration of that, so I don't think it's terrible. So, and it's remarkable. I don't, off the top, there are stories about anti-heroes and supervillains, but off the top of my head, I can't think of very many properties where there are only supervillains and no superheroes. I can think of kind of gothic situation or dark fantasy where like demons are really present in the world, but like heaven and angels either aren't very present or are essentially just another political faction and aren't necessarily that different than demons, or at least not as virtuous as painted out to be, right? Like, and that is kind of a world full of bad guys, those take on things, right? But I haven't seen that as much in the superhero space. So, because most superhero spaces, like Marvel, DC Comics, are large universes, so they're not committing to having a universe where there are no superheroes. So that's remarkable, even though it's that simple. And, it's not much longer than the original one. It hits at the same villains and heroes thing. It's just more specific. It prompts curiosity, etc. So I think that would have been a better pitch. But the one I ended up with that I think I liked, again, but you'd have to, again, allow the mentioning of superheroes or supervillains, and I don't know if that was taboo for Brandon Sanderson. But the last one I did is who will stand up to the supervillains on an Earth with no superheroes? And so this is kind of bringing David, the gun-toting orphan, the rifle-toting orphan, or the factory kid, right? It's implying him, it's implying the Reckoners a little bit more, and the action, the standing up to, right? And it's still maintaining the supervillain, and the no superheroes dichotomy, right? And so the heroes have to be regular people. Regular people have to stand up if the people with superpowers aren't. Which, I mean, that is, like, I kind of maybe portrayed with, like, rifle-toting orphan. You might, like, think, like, oh, this is an awful series because it's the bad pitch, it's the wrong pitch. But, like, that is something for a YA series that I liked. Don't wait for heroes to save you. Figure out how you can be a hero. And that evolves from this very specific and kind of violent focus on revenge for David in the first book. He actually develops and grows as a person, and his view of what it means to be a hero changes dramatically and in good ways throughout the series. And so there are these themes. And so I think this really sets up that core theme, as well as implying some of like the content and the conflict, and then giving someone remarkable one of the things I think that is remarkable about this property. Now, notice that if I just took the theme, right, that sometimes you have to be the hero instead of waiting for them, like that could be in a lot of different genres. You take that theme and you combine it with something remarkable. A super's world in which there are no heroes, superpowered heroes, right? Bam, that's a more memorable pitch. Now, this still might not be for everyone. I don't think, did I forget to mention this earlier? So, in the previous pitch, the lesbian necromancers in space, or the lesbian necromancers explore a haunted gothic castle in space. There's one person in our group who said, like, that sounds awful. Like, I hate that. Like, it's too pulpy and too mainstream. And that's a totally legit reaction. She is not the target for that audience. It worked for someone like me. Like, I have an older brother who sends me like weird B horror films from like the 90s and 2000s or earlier, right? Who loved, Tales from the Crypt growing up and pulpy comics. Sends me when he's been browsing in used bookstores, like, pulp science fiction from the 50s or something like that. And so I have been I have come to associate the pulp genre with my admiration for my brother. And so anyway, so that tagline jumped at me, right? But it's not going to jump at everyone. Not everyone's your target audience. Your pitch does not have to work for everyone. But I would love your feedback. Did this final pitch, right? Let's compare the original and the final pitch. Do you think it was better? And, if you're in the target audience, would you get that book? If so, maybe go buy the book. All right. But the first pitch was, let me make sure I'm getting that right. Where there are villains, there will be heroes. And my favorite version is who will stand up to the supervillains on an Earth with no superheroes. So, which do you think is better? Give it a shot. And do you see the difference? Do you see the difference in those 4 dimensions? I would love to, if you've read this book, hear your pitches down below, or, just take that summary I did and pitch it. You've heard enough about it now. You could write a pitch, maybe not encapsulating everything, but you give it a shot. Or, if you want to try something else, just go ahead and practice your pitches down below. Feedback is welcome. Let people know if you want feedback on your pitches, or pitch your book. You can just straight up do that. But yeah, the comments space of this video is for pitches and feedback. You can give feedback to me as much as you want. If you are somebody else posting a pitch, let people know if you want feedback. So, because there's nothing that rubs you the wrong way like unasked for feedback. So, thank you for watching this video. I had a really fun time. And to be honest, stay tuned or subscribe, because if I can, this is a long shot, this is my Hail Mary, I'm gonna reach out to Brandon Sanderson, see if I can get a hold of someone, and see if I can run ads using his pitch and copy and materials versus running ads on my own, and see which gets more traffic. I think that would be a super fun experiment to run. I don't know if he's going to greenlight that, or if he would greenlight the copy that I would write. Again, I kind of have a suspicion that maybe there are some outside handicaps, or maybe the blurbs and the pitch were just really vague. I don't know. But stay tuned, subscribe if that's the kind of content you're interested in, because this is what this channel is all about, helping authors become better marketers. And man, the thing to nail that will make everything else so much more effective is the pitch. So go ahead and give it a practice in the comments below, and subscribe to follow my journey on mastering the book pitch.